I sat at the dinner table, lasagna still warm in its Tupperware, as my daughter folded her hands and told me there was no room for me. Her voice was soft, rehearsed, like a doctor delivering bad news without looking up from the chart. My son-in-law didn't meet my eyes. My granddaughter never looked up from her phone. And just like that, after decades of birthdays, babysitting, and being the emergency contact on every school form, I became someone with no place at the table. Before we begin, may I ask, where in this big, beautiful world are you listening from? It's always a quiet honor to know who's sharing this space. Drop it in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe.
The lasagna was still warm when Elaine stepped into her daughter's house. She'd balanced the Tupperware on her lap the entire drive, letting the heat radiate into her fingers, steadying herself with its weight. The house smelled faintly of sandalwood and lemon cleaner, artificial warmth. Caroline was already seated when Elaine entered the dining room. Ethan stood from the head of the table just long enough to gesture toward a chair across from him before sitting again. Lily offered a soft smile that didn't quite reach her eyes, then turned her attention back to her phone. Elaine placed the container gently on the sideboard, still sealed. "I thought we could have this later. I used extra basil, your favorite," she said, her voice smooth but laced with hope. Carolyn gave a polite smile, the kind she used on neighbors she didn't want to offend. She folded her hands together, elbows off the table, chin tilted slightly upward. "Mom," she began, "we've been talking and—" Elaine straightened slightly, her pulse ticking up. Talking. That could mean anything. "We just don't have room for you right now," Caroline continued, her voice too soft, too practiced. "It's not that we don't care, it's just things are really tight." Ethan nodded, glancing at Caroline like a boardroom partner backing a proposal. "We were thinking maybe down the road. Something more structured could be an option. Assisted living, or a care coordinator, if needed." Elaine looked at them, her daughter with perfectly smooth hair and perfectly smooth detachment, and her son-in-law with that accountant's expression of measured sympathy, not cruelty, just the quiet efficiency of denial. Lily, still tapping at her phone, didn't look up. Elaine didn't cry. She didn't speak for a moment. She let the silence hold. Then she offered a simple, "Of course." The words didn't tremble. She stood, her hands smoothing the front of her sweater. "I won't stay for dinner then," she said, her voice still gentle, but now flat, even. "Thank you for your time." Caroline opened her mouth, maybe to soften the blow, but Elaine didn't give her the space. She turned, slow but steady, her shoes clicking softly on the hardwood as she made her way back to the front door. She didn't take the Tupperware. Back in her car, the autumn sun had dipped lower behind the Blue Ridge, casting long shadows across the road. The drive home was quiet except for the occasional rustle of dry leaves caught in her tires. Asheville's winding back roads always felt longer on the return trip, like the curves themselves knew what you were coming back from. She parked, let the engine idle for a moment, then killed it. Inside the house, the stillness met her like a wall. Thick, unmoving, familiar. Her late husband's slippers still sat by the armchair. His reading glasses still rested on the worn copy of East of Eden he never finished. Elaine moved toward the study. The cabinet creaked when she opened it, revealing the rows of meticulously labeled folders. She ran her hand across the tabs until she found it. Estate, drafts, joint. The folder was heavier than she remembered. Legal pads, forms, letters. Her husband's handwriting appeared in the margins, softer now, faded by time. There were notes. Caroline will know what to do. And in another section, let's make it simple for her. Elaine stared at the lines. The ache that started behind her ribs didn't come with tears. It came with clarity. She sat at the desk, the folder open before her, pen uncapped beside it. Caroline had said it kindly, carefully, but there had been no stutter, no hesitation. It wasn't an accident, it was a decision. And Elaine, for the first time in a very long time, was about to make one of her own. The Tupperware was gone. The room had no place for her. But this cabinet, this paper, had plenty of space left to be rewritten. The morning after the dinner that wasn't, the quiet in Elaine's house felt heavier. Not solemn, not bitter, just still. The kind of stillness that follows a final answer. Sunlight filtered through the blinds, striping the desk where the estate binder sat open like a wound. She hadn't slept much. Instead, she had spent the early hours flipping through each tab and signature page, reading and rereading the legacy she and her husband had once so carefully composed. Caroline's name was everywhere: executor, healthcare proxy, sole heir. Every legal avenue ran through her daughter like she'd already inherited the future. Some pages even bore notes in Robert's handwriting, slanted and soft, like everything he did. Make this easier for Caroline. She'll step up. Elaine took a pen and crossed out the first one, then the next, not in anger, in slow, deliberate lines, like sweeping cobwebs from a ceiling no one had touched in years. The phone's receiver felt smooth and cold against her cheek when she finally picked it up. She pressed each number with care. Isaac Dyer's office, said a pleasant voice. "This is Elaine Foster," she said calmly. "I'd like to schedule an appointment to revise an estate plan." Immediately. Later that afternoon, the front door creaked open to the scent of banana bread and perfume with too much vanilla. Joanna Briggs let herself in like always, holding a wrapped plate and a nose for unfinished business. "I brought carbs and questions," Joanna said, already scanning the room like a bloodhound for emotional smoke. Elaine smiled faintly. "You'll find both on the desk." Joanna glanced at the binder, then at Elaine, reading the tension in her friend's spine before she even approached. "That the original?" Elaine nodded. "Too original. It assumes I'll never be on my own." Joanna placed the bread on the coffee table, walked to the desk, and leaned over the open binder. "Well," she said, flipping a page, "Carolyn's name sure pops up like an ad you can't skip." Elaine didn't laugh, but the corners of her mouth twitched. She uncapped the pen again, circled another clause with Carolyn's name, then drew a neat X through it. "She didn't just close a door," Elaine murmured. "She closed a chapter. Now I'm editing the ending." Joanna, who hated euphemisms as much as she hated store-bought pie crusts, simply said, "About damn time." By late afternoon, Elaine sat across from Isaac Dyer in his office. All soft wood and glass, not a single paper out of place. He greeted her with that same cool professionalism she remembered from when she and Robert first drafted their will. Back then, everything had felt so distant. Just paperwork for far-off problems. Now, every page mattered. Isaac adjusted his reading glasses and opened the binder. He turned the pages slowly, nodding, lips pursed in silence. Elaine watched his eyes flick past each clause with practiced precision. "I assume you want to remove Caroline from all roles?" he asked finally. Meeting her gaze, Elaine gave one small nod. "Executor, POA, medical proxy, all of it." "Understood." He pulled out a fresh legal pad. "Do you have a secondary in mind?" "Joanna," Elaine said without hesitation. "And for the legacy trust, Lily. But I want controls, delayed access, not a penny until she's 30. Isaac didn't blink. "We can do that." He flipped back to the original binder, tapped the section Robert had annotated with, "Caroline will know what to do." Elaine looked at the faded ink, then back at Isaac. "She won't need to know anymore," she said quietly. She gave up that seat. Isaac clicked his pen. "Let's clean house." And for the first time since the night Caroline had said the words, those 7 small final words, Elaine felt like someone was finally listening. Elaine's hand didn't shake as she turned the first page. Isaac Dyer sat across from her at his polished oak desk, his pen poised and patient. The light in the room was soft, filtered through linen blinds that swayed slightly in the breeze from the vent. No sound but the clock ticking on the wall and the slow, steady scratch of a pen slicing through legacy. They started with the will, page 3, Caroline Foster Reed, executor. Isaac slid the document forward. Do you confirm full removal of your daughter from this role? Elaine nodded once, firm. I do. Pen to paper. A clean line struck through Caroline's name. A new one entered in Joanna's tidy handwriting, Joanna M. Briggs, primary executor. Elaine initialed beside it with deliberate precision. The ink smelled faintly of alcohol and finality. Next came the power of attorney. Isaac flipped to the legal proxy section. Previously listed medical and financial agent is Caroline Reed, he said, though Elaine already knew it. Would you like Joanna in her place for both designations? No, Elaine said. I want Joanna for financial, but medical goes to Lily when she turns 18. Isaac looked up, surprised for the first time that day. She's only 14 now. I know, Elaine said, but she's the only one who still listens with her whole heart. He hesitated only a moment, then nodded. We'll make it effective upon her legal majority. In the meantime, Joanna can act as a contingent. Elaine sat a little straighter. They moved on. The living trust, Caroline had been designated sole heir, with full discretion over assets. Elaine crossed her name out before Isaac even asked. I want Lily to inherit the home, but with delayed control, she said. Access to financials only after she completes college or turns 30, whichever comes first. Until then, held in trust. Strict conditions. No access by her parents. Isaac scribbled notes beside the clause. Will include protective language. Educational distributions only. No early disbursements allowed. Elaine nodded. Include a tuition clause. Books, housing, school needs. Not a dime beyond that until she earns it. Isaac lifted a document from the back of the folder. We'll need to formalize an intentional exclusion with full awareness clause. It's airtight. States you've knowingly and specifically left Caroline out of all inheritance channels. Elaine met his eyes. Put it in bold. The next 30 minutes passed in quiet efficiency. Page after page. Revised. Notarized. Witnessed. Joanna arrived midway through, shaking off the light mist from outside and setting down her umbrella by the door. I brought my reading glasses and my signature pen, she said, folding into the empty chair beside Elaine. I thought you might, Elaine said softly. Isaac passed her the documents. Joanna signed each one without flinching, her handwriting even and sharp. Some people write their legacy in memories, she murmured. Others in ink. Elaine didn't respond. She was focused on her initials, the small looping EF she pressed into every corner of the newly revised documents. A quiet, final stamp. When they were done, Isaac clipped the last page onto the stack and tapped it into alignment. We'll scan and archive everything, he said. And I'll file the new healthcare directive with your primary physician. Elaine stood slowly, her knees stiff, but her steps steady. She turned to Joanna. Let's go get some coffee. As they stepped into the hallway, the outside world already felt more distant. The future no longer something to fear, but something she had just taken back. Elaine's phone buzzed. A message from Caroline. Let's do lunch soon. Things have been crazy. No apology, no mention of what was said. Just a casual offer dressed in pretend warmth. Elaine locked the screen and slipped the phone into her purse. She didn't need to reply. Some messages erased themselves. The silence felt cleaner than any reply ever could. Instead, Elaine closed the message, walked to the kitchen drawer, and pulled out her yellow legal pad, the same one she used when she and Henry first mapped out their retirement plans. She wrote 2 words at the top. Next steps. First, fireproof safe. She ordered one online, medium size, enough to hold documents, a thumb drive, a small velvet pouch with Henry's wedding ring, and the envelope marked Lily. 18 only, she had just begun writing. Second, mailbox lock. The one outside had rust on the hinges and barely latched. Too many years of trusting everyone. She called the locksmith before she made her coffee. Third, passwords and beneficiaries. Every account, email, savings, brokerage, even her audiobook subscription was reset that morning. The answers to her security questions now lived in a spiral notebook that would never see the inside of a browser. Isaac confirmed the trust updates had been processed that afternoon. All finalized, he said over the phone. No inheritance leaks, no joint designations, no executorship vulnerabilities. It's exactly how you wanted. Elaine had thanked him, but the relief hadn't hit until she hung up. It was real. Caroline was out, legally, financially, structurally. There would be no surprise court filings. No "we thought we were entitled" speeches when Elaine was no longer around to respond. Only what had been filed. Only what had been signed. The mail came just before dusk. Bills, catalogs, a postcard. Elaine's breath caught as she turned it over. Pale pink hydrangeas on the front, a short note on the back in Lily's familiar, slightly loopy handwriting. "Hi, Grandma, I miss you. Hope you're okay. Mom says you've been busy, but I think about you a lot. Lily." No return address, no mention of her parents. Elaine traced the letters with her fingers before walking it over to the mantel. She didn't have a frame small enough, so she clipped it inside the corner of the one that still held a photo of her and Henry on their 40th anniversary. Her thumb brushed the glass. "I'm okay," she whispered. She meant it. That night, she roasted a chicken just for herself. Thyme, lemon, garlic, the way Lily liked it, and plated it with extra roasted carrots. She poured 1 glass of white wine and took it to the porch, eating slow as the mountain breeze curled around her ankles and whispered through the wind chimes. By the time the sun had dipped behind the ridge, she'd cleared her plate and made a mental note to bake Lily's favorite blueberry muffins the next morning. She wouldn't send them, she just wanted them in the house. The knock came the next day. 3 short raps on the front door. Not loud, not hesitant, but intentional. The knocking came again, 4 measured taps, spaced just far enough apart to sound polite, but deliberate. The kind of knock Elaine had taught Caroline as a child, back when manners mattered in their home. Funny how those lessons had outlived their meaning. Elaine didn't move from her spot behind the curtain. She already knew who it was. The same shape through the frosted glass. The same performance of concern. She stepped closer to the peephole, careful not to make the floorboards creak. There she was, Carolyn. Light pink cardigan, hair swept back in a low bun, like she'd just come from the church she hadn't been to in years. Her face held a look that mimicked warmth, but couldn't quite disguise its calculation. Elaine stared at her own daughter and felt nothing. Not anger, not sadness, just nothing. "Mom?" Caroline called out, soft enough to seem sweet, loud enough for the doorbell camera to catch. Across the lawn, Joanna was watering her hydrangeas in her sun hat, pretending not to watch, but her eyes kept drifting across the property line. Elaine didn't open the door. Instead, she slowly walked to the kitchen, the floorboards sighing underfoot. She set the kettle on the stove, clicked the burner on, and let the sound of the gas flame fill the silence. The knock came again. A little firmer this time. Joanna called over from her porch, her voice casual but edged. "Want me to say something?" Elaine leaned slightly toward the window, just enough for her eyes to meet Joanna's. She shook her head once. "No, not today." Caroline stood on the steps for another minute. Then, as though she remembered she was being watched, by a lens, by a neighbor, maybe by her own conscience, she took out a brown paper bag and placed it carefully at the door. She paused, looked at the camera, and smiled. The kind of smile people practiced in mirrors before family holidays. Elaine waited until she was gone. Only then did she open the door, slowly, cautiously, as if letting out stale air. The bag was still warm from the sun. Inside, 3 oversized muffins, dry at the edges, wrapped in crinkled cellophane. A folded note rested on top in Caroline's handwriting. "We love you. Let's talk soon." See, Elaine didn't bring the bag inside. She carried it straight to the garage, lifted the lid of the bin, and dropped it in. Then she walked back into the house and pulled the note from her sweater pocket. She unfolded it again, read the words once, twice, then fed it through the shredder, watching each line disappear beneath the blades. The machine made a low, satisfying hum as it turned the page into dust. There was no pain in the act, only a clarity that tasted faintly like relief. She didn't want to be in her daughter's way. That had been made clear, and now Caroline wouldn't be in hers. Back in the living room, Elaine sat with a fresh cup of tea, her fingers wrapped around the mug like it was an anchor. The framed postcard from Lily caught her eye. Its corners were curling slightly in the sun, but the ink hadn't faded. The silence was interrupted by a soft ding, an email. She adjusted her reading glasses, opened her laptop, and clicked it open. From Isaac Dyer. Subject: House deed transfer. Ready for execution. Message: we can now proceed with the deed transfer into the irrevocable trust. Let me know when you'd like to sign. Everything else is in place. Elaine's lips pressed into a thin line. She clicked reply. Let's do it this week. Elaine. She hit send and stared at the screen for a moment. That house, her house, had once been built with the dream that it would always be a family place. Birthdays, holidays, second chances. But Caroline had shut the door on all of that with a single sentence. There's no room for you. Now, there wouldn't be room for her either. Not in the deed, not in the trust, not in anything Elaine left behind. She took a slow sip of tea, letting it burn just enough to feel alive. This was her house, and it would stay that way. Elaine stood barefoot in the center of her living room, the hardwood cool under her arches, the afternoon sun slanting across the mantel where her wedding photos still sat. Outside, blue jays fluttered in the azaleas. Inside, the house felt still, but not empty. Not anymore. Isaac Dyer's voice on speakerphone was calm, clipped. The deed has been officially recorded. The house is now under the Foster Living Trust. Irrevocable. Elaine blinked slowly, as though something in her chest had finally exhaled. Thank you, Isaac, he continued. It passes to Lily upon your death or incapacitation, but with usage restrictions until she turns 30. No outside party, including Caroline, has rights to initiate any sale or mortgage transaction. Not ever. Elaine walked to the window and drew back the curtain an inch. Across the street, Joanna was out front, waving a hose lazily over her begonias. The hum of summer buzzed beyond the glass. Elaine didn't open it. She turned back toward the kitchen, opened a drawer, and pulled out the white binder, now retitled The Foster Legacy Plan. She slipped the newly stamped deed inside a protective sleeve and smoothed the page with the palm of her hand. In the margins of the trust summary, Isaac had scribbled an added clause at her request. No sale or legal conveyance permitted by Caroline Reed or any affiliated party, present or future. Elaine had underlined it herself. Bank accounts had followed shortly after. Isaac had walked her through every form, retitling her checking, savings, CDs, and even the cabin rental escrow into the trust. Each move was deliberate, final, protected. She hadn't needed Joanna's commentary, but got it anyway. That's how you ghost someone legally, Joanna said, standing in Elaine's dining room 2 days later, her glasses slipping down her nose as she read the trust cover page upside down. Elaine offered her a cup of tea and smiled faintly. She told me there was no room, she said. I made sure that's true forever. They sipped in silence, broken only by the whisper of cicadas through the open back door. Elaine's mind wandered briefly to the way Caroline had once referred to this house as her someday place. When Elaine and Richard were still spry, Caroline had once said, "It'll be easier when you're here and not across town. Ethan can work from your study. We can turn the guest room into Lily's art space." Elaine had chuckled at the time, not realizing that to Caroline, it wasn't a sentimental joke. It was a silent blueprint. Now, That blueprint was gone, replaced. Elaine sealed the binder and locked it in her new fireproof safe behind the linen closet. She ran a hand along the frame as if confirming its finality. No paper in that house now had Caroline's name with power behind it. Only Lily's, spaced out in careful clauses, protected by timing, trust walls, and a team Caroline didn't even know existed. Later that evening, as twilight stretched long shadows across her driveway, Elaine sat with a soft blanket over her knees, flipping through a worn recipe card for Lily's favorite blackberry crumble. She didn't hear the email ping at first. It wasn't until she reached for her glasses and checked her phone that she saw it. Subject line, checking in, from Ethan Reed. Time, 7:32 p.m. Caroline's worried you're isolating. Let's meet. She clicked forward and typed a quick note to Isaac. Elaine Foster. Ethan wants to meet. Should I respond? The reply came back in under 5 minutes. Isaac Dyer. Not advisable. You've documented intent, and contact complicates boundaries. If you choose to respond, keep it formal, factual, and impersonal. Elaine nodded to herself. It matched what she already felt in her bones. No invitation had been sent, and none was owed. She opened a blank message and began typing slowly, each word chosen like a stone placed carefully in a path she'd never walk again. Ethan, thank you for the message. I appreciate the concern, but I'm well and managing my affairs independently. I've made personal and legal decisions I'm comfortable with. Best, Elaine Foster. Not mom, not even mother. She clicked send and stared out the window, the last rays of afternoon sun painting golden rectangles on her kitchen tile. Outside, Joanna was hunched over a box on her porch, sorting mail or maybe trimming dead leaves from her hydrangea. The light made her silver hair look like threads of silk. That evening, Joanna came by with the insurance switch forms. She slapped the folder down on the dining table like a winning hand. Done, she said, satisfied. Homeowners, auto, life. Every last beneficiary and point of contact rerouted. Elaine flipped through the pages, her name at the top. Lily's nestled carefully underneath. Caroline's name didn't appear once. She didn't even need to be removed. She'd never bothered to show up in the first place. Joanna leaned on her elbow. You want me to bring the dessert wine? Elaine smiled. Not tonight. I'm too clear-headed to ruin it. They shared a quiet laugh, one born from shared years, not shared blood. The next day, Elaine's phone rang once, the screen lighting up with Lily's name. Hi, sweetheart, Elaine answered, her voice softening. Lily's voice was tentative. Hi, Grandma. I just wanted to say hi. I know things are kind of weird. They're not weird, Elaine said gently. They're just not sugar-coated anymore. A pause, then. I think they're upset. I heard them talking in the car. Elaine closed her eyes, imagining Lily hunched in the back seat, headphones on but not listening to music. That's not your fault, she said, and it's not your weight to carry. There was another pause, this one longer. I miss you. I know, Elaine whispered. I miss you too. When they hung up, Elaine stood in the middle of the living room, one hand on the fireplace mantel, the other cradling the cordless phone. Outside, a squirrel darted across the lawn. The world didn't stop for estrangement. It never did. She made herself tea and went back to her reading. A mystery novel she wasn't particularly enjoying. The plot twists felt forced. Unlike life, where the cruelty was often unplanned and the silence always earned. Later that night, Joanna sent a screenshot to her phone, a Facebook post. Carolyn Foster Reed. 8 minutes ago. Nothing hurts more than being pushed out of your own mother's life. Elaine stared at the screen. The post had already gathered a small crowd of sympathetic comments. Friends from book club, PTA moms, someone she didn't recognize named Charisse with a long string of emojis. Joanna tapped her phone twice, took a screenshot, and without adding a single emoji or exclamation, forwarded it to Elaine. The subject line read only, FYI. Elaine opened the message, then the image. There was Carolyn, postured carefully on Facebook with a caption beneath a filtered photo. "Nothing hurts more than being pushed out of your own mother's life." A heart emoji, a sad face, and 3 comments already expressing sympathy. The photo wasn't recent, not even close. It was one of those manufactured moments from years ago, taken during a rare visit where smiles didn't outlast dessert. Caroline had her head tilted toward Elaine, whose eyes in the image were already distracted by Lily reaching for a napkin. Elaine didn't sigh, didn't blink. She pressed and held her thumb on the screen, hit block, and confirmed it. She sent a single-line email to Isaac. "She's gone public." By late afternoon, Isaac replied, "I filed a preemptive estate defense record, attached to the trust. No response needed on your end. Let the record show she initiated the public narrative." Elaine didn't type a thank you. She closed the email and stood. Down the hall, the second bedroom closet held a set of storage tubs she'd marked for sorting someday. That day had arrived. She pulled the containers out and opened the first one. Inside were carefully stacked family photos, some framed, some loose, and several sealed in envelopes still bearing ink from decades past. She filtered methodically. Photos with Ethan went in one pile. Photos with Caroline where Lily wasn't present went into another. The rest she kept. The discard pile went into a box. She labeled it in bold black Sharpie. Donor, Anonymous. The Asheville Centennial Time Capsule Project was accepting family memorabilia for an archival exhibit. These images would outlive her without telling anyone's story but their own. Before sunset, she drove the box to the donation office and left it without fanfare. That night, Elaine pulled out the health proxy form again. She removed Caroline's name entirely. Joanna was already listed as primary emergency contact. At the bottom, beneath the signature line, Isaac had left space for personal instructions. Elaine wrote, "The named individual was removed by the grantor due to long-term emotional estrangement." She reviewed it twice before sealing it in the fireproof folder labeled, "Health Final." After dinner, she opened her estate binder to the legacy section and added a new letter. No date, no name. Just one line that read, "Estrangement isn't cruelty. It's clarity with boundaries." She folded the letter neatly, slid it into a plastic sleeve behind the summary of trust updates, and locked the binder again. Joanna stopped by the next morning with a thermos of coffee and 2 cheddar scones. "She's playing the victim," Joanna said as she sat at the kitchen table. Elaine stirred her tea without looking up. Some people mistake silence for permission. They didn't need to say more. They ate slowly, watching the light shift across the hardwood floor. After Joanna left, Elaine opened her laptop to check the weather. Rain by the weekend. Before she could close the browser, her email chimed. From Lily Reed. Subject, weekend. "Hi, Grandma. I was wondering, can I come see you this weekend?" Just me. Elaine reread it once, twice, then leaned back in her chair, heart steadied not by the question, but by who was asking it. Elaine opened the front door before Lily could knock. The girl stood on the porch in a navy windbreaker, her backpack slung low on one shoulder and a paper bag folded under her arm. Elaine's arms opened without a word, and Lily fell into them like she'd been holding her breath for weeks. Inside, the kitchen smelled of cinnamon and brown butter. Elaine had made her signature scones that morning, the way Lily always liked them. No glaze, extra crumbly, still warm. 2 plates were set, one with a linen napkin tucked under the fork like it was a cafe instead of a quiet mountain home. Lily peeled off her jacket and let her shoulders relax. "It smells like you never left," she said, glancing around the kitchen as if taking inventory of every familiar detail. "I haven't," Elaine replied, "but it's felt emptier without you." They sat, the kitchen clock ticking in the background. Lily took a bite of scone and closed her eyes for a moment. "I've missed this." Elaine poured tea. No questions. No talk about anything you don't want to say. Lily smiled, grateful. She didn't bring up her parents. She didn't have to. That afternoon, Elaine pulled a plastic bin from under the guest bed and set it gently on the living room floor. Inside were photos, postcards, pressed flowers and wax paper, and old ticket stubs from places Elaine had gone. Moments she'd kept quiet about while everyone else talked over her. "What's this?" Lily asked. "My life," Elaine said. "At least the parts that made me feel like myself." They spent hours assembling a scrapbook. Lily used a fine-tipped pen to write captions in neat lines. New York, 1972. Fall Book Festival, downtown Asheville. Your grandfather's favorite trail, where he first kissed my hand. Elaine watched her, steady and silent, letting Lily give voice to the things she'd once kept tucked away, as the late sun stretched golden stripes across the hardwood. Elaine gently slid a letter from the drawer and set it beside the scrapbook. "For you," she said. "You'll inherit more than money." Lily opened it but didn't read it aloud. Instead, she tucked it inside the scrapbook's front sleeve and whispered, "Thank you." That night, after hot cocoa and a movie they'd both memorized by heart, Lily asked to sleep in the guest room with the quilt Elaine had made years ago. She disappeared down the hallway with the ease of someone returning home. Elaine stayed up, her hand hovering over her pen, unsure if words were still needed after such a quiet, full day. She didn't notice the drawing until she went to close her desk drawer. Tucked between the stationery and envelopes was a folded page, torn from Lily's sketch pad. On it, a house, drawn in colored pencil. 2 women stood on the porch, one older, one younger, with a golden retriever beside them, tail mid-wag. Above the house, in careful print, Lily had written, "My real home." Elaine ran her fingertips over the pencil lines, letting the weight of it sink in. All the legal documents, the notary stamps, the irrevocable trusts, none of it had captured her legacy as clearly as that single page. She slipped the drawing behind the glass panel of a nearby photo frame, displacing a picture of Caroline in the process. No fanfare, no grudge, just space made for what mattered now. The next morning, as Lily packed up to leave, she paused by the front door and looked back. "Thank you," she said softly. "Not just for the weekend." Elaine kissed her cheek. "You always have a room here, even if no one else did." Lily's ride arrived, and just like that, the house returned to silence, but it felt different now, less hollow, more chosen. Elaine was wiping down the kitchen counter when she saw it. A white envelope slid through the mail slot, slightly curled at the edges. No stamp, no return address. She picked it up, turned it over. Elaine recognized the handwriting before the envelope hit the floor. It had that familiar forced grace, cursive that tried too hard to look warm. Her daughter had always written like someone imitating sincerity. She picked it up but didn't break the seal. She didn't need to. There were only so many ways Caroline could repackage guilt. Elaine slid the letter into a fresh envelope, plain and cream-colored. Then, with practiced calm, she wrote across the front in steady block letters, "Return to sender." No longer at this emotional address. She set it by the front door, beside the basket where she kept things that no longer belonged inside her home. Later that morning, she called Isaac. "A letter arrived," she said. "Did you open it?" "No," Elaine replied. But I spoke back. There was a pause, then Isaac chuckled softly. "Very poetic, very binding. I'll note it in the file." Elaine hung up and turned to her desk, where a half-finished task waited. She opened the project labeled Legacy Video, Final Draft, adjusted the webcam, and hit record. Her voice stayed clear as she addressed the one person who still deserved everything. "Lily," she said, "this isn't about what I've lost. It's about what I've chosen to protect. No stories about betrayal, no rehearsed monologues. Just one woman marking the line between love and survival." She finished in under 5 minutes. No second take. When Joanna arrived to film the formal version for Isaac's archive, Elaine already had the lighting set. She wore the sweater Lily gave her last Christmas and no makeup. "You ready?" Joanna asked, raising the lens. Elaine nodded. "This time, I'm speaking for the record." The final file was backed up in 3 locations: one in Isaac's office, one in Elaine's new fireproof safe, and one mailed to a secure digital executor. That evening, Elaine cleaned her inbox. She unsubscribed from newsletters Caroline had once signed her up for without asking. She deleted old threads. She blocked Caroline's email, then paused, scrolled to Lily's name, and smiled. She didn't need many contacts, just the right ones. The next day, a soft knock came at the door, the mail carrier holding a return receipt from Tri-State Lending. Elaine raised an eyebrow. She hadn't applied for any financial products. Inside the packet was a notification. Someone had attempted to use her address and identity on a home equity loan. The handwriting on the original request form? Identical to the letter she had just refused. Elaine scanned the document, then calmly called Isaac. She tried to list my property on a loan form. Isaac's voice didn't flinch. That's attempted fraud. Since she's not authorized on the trust, we'll notify the lender. I'll file the flag. Elaine stared out the window as she listened. The light shifted behind the trees, long shadows stretching across her driveway. There was no panic in her chest, just confirmation. She thought the letter would soften the ground, Elaine said quietly. Then she brought a shovel. She won't get far, Isaac replied. Everything's protected. Elaine ended the call and placed the fraudulent application printout into her safe, behind the estate documents and next to her notarized healthcare directive. There was no need for confrontation, no speech to deliver. Everything that mattered was already written, with signatures, timestamps, and intent. She walked back into the kitchen, reheated her tea, and looked at the space above the mantel. A new frame sat there, small, hand-painted, still slightly crooked from where Lily had hung it herself. Inside it was a photo of the two of them, taken last summer. No one else in the shot, just them. Elaine smiled. The letter was gone, but Lily remained, the only address that still mattered. Within minutes, Isaac was on speakerphone. She tried again, he said, already 3 steps ahead. Same lender. This time she listed herself as a co-beneficiary. She isn't even mentioned in the current trust, Elaine replied, calm but precise. And that, Isaac said, is exactly why this qualifies as fraud. He filed the identity theft flag immediately, pulling in her updated estate documents as legal proof. Every revocation, every clause, every signature was already time-stamped and sealed. Elaine wasn't surprised. Disappointed, yes, but surprise had long since left the equation. By mid-morning, she'd filed her own report with the bank. The loan officer, apologetic and flustered, confirmed that Caroline's application had been halted, permanently. The woman had claimed power she didn't hold. The paper trail proved it. They said she was shocked, Isaac told her later, voice dry. Apparently, she thought her name was still on things. Elaine didn't respond. Instead, she walked to the hallway closet, unlocked the small chest inside, and lifted out the envelope labeled Post-Exclusion Protections. A copy of every file was in place. She added the fraud notification and closed the latch. Then, without a word, she upgraded her safe. Not metaphorically, she actually ordered a new one. Larger, biometric, dual-layered. It arrived 2 days later, and she had it bolted into the floor beneath her office rug. Joanna stood by with her hands on her hips, watching the delivery men struggle. This, she muttered, is how a woman builds a castle. Elaine cracked a smile, with documents, not bricks. Joanna stayed after they left, helping refile the materials with near-military precision. When the last file slid into place, she looked at Elaine with something between pride and wonder. You know, Joanna said, for someone who never raised her voice, you've locked down more peace than most people scream for. Elaine didn't look up. Noise is a distraction. Paper is permanent. They shared tea that afternoon. The porch was quiet except for birdsong and wind. The world hadn't erupted. No backlash, no confrontation. Just silence, earned and engineered. That evening, Carolyn's social media went dark. No vague posts, no commentary, just absence. Isaac texted, "We've documented her attempt to gain access. If she tries again, it's prosecutable." Elaine replied with a simple period. It was enough. She spent the next morning in the garden, gloves on, pruning what had grown too wild. She clipped precisely, no sentiment in the act, just care. By afternoon, a package arrived. It was small, wrapped in recycled brown paper. No return address, just Lily's neat handwriting. Inside was a framed photo, candid, clearly taken on a timer. Elaine was seated under the dogwood tree in her backyard, sunlight painting her shoulders. Lily sat beside her, head tilted onto her grandmother's arm. Tucked into the bottom of the frame was a note, barely visible unless you looked closely. "This is where I always feel safe." Elaine stared at the image, her eyes finally softening. She traced the frame's edge with her thumb. There were no conditions in this gesture. No manipulation, just memory. She placed the photo on her mantle, right next to the sealed binder that Caroline would never read. Then, in a quiet motion, she folded the old photo of the entire family, the one from a decade ago, and slid it into a drawer she hadn't opened in months. The past no longer needed to be displayed. Elaine sat by the window, watching sunlight drag across her kitchen tiles. It was the kind of day her late husband would have used to wash the car. But now, the only polish being applied was to her legacy. The courier envelope arrived just after 10. Thick, cream-colored, unbent. Isaac's handwriting marked it clearly. Finalized estate plan, certified copy. She opened it with a letter opener she hadn't used since 2004. Everything inside gleamed with intention. Bound pages, notarized clauses, the embossed trust seal. No loopholes, no back doors, no Caroline. Later that morning, Isaac called just to confirm. "It's all executed," he said. "Even if someone tried to contest it, they'd be eaten alive in court." Elaine smiled faintly. "Good," she said. "That's the plan." She placed the certified packet in the biometric safe, next to Lily's scholarship documents and the house deed transfer instructions. The rest, duplicates and backups, went into the fireproof drawer. With the ink dry, she turned to the boxes marked "Keep," stacked in the corner of the living room. Inside were old linens, pressed photographs, china sets she hadn't used in years. She moved through them quietly, sorting what had meaning from what only held dust. By mid-afternoon, she stood at the front desk of the Asheville Heritage Museum. The curator, a young woman with paint under her nails, blinked as Elaine opened the lid to a carved walnut box filled with heirloom jewelry and annotated family recipes. "These are from a home that no longer needs them," Elaine said softly. "Use them however you see fit." The museum accepted the donation with a release form and a grateful handshake. Elaine signed it without hesitation. She was unhooking herself, strand by strand. Back home, she finalized the funeral directive. No public service. No obituary in the paper. No open invites. A list of 5 names would receive notifications. Caroline and Ethan weren't on it. Lily, of course, was. The folder went into the legacy binder under the tab marked End Plans. On the inside cover, Elaine taped a note for Joanna. "If you're reading this, I've made my peace. Please carry out the plan as we discussed. Keep it quiet. Keep it kind." Joanna came by later with 2 slices of lemon cake and 1 eyebrow raised. "So," she asked, "you've now shut every door, drawn every line, and signed every dotted thing." Elaine chuckled, pulling 2 forks from the drawer. "Almost. There's one last task tomorrow." They sat on the porch as the sky dimmed. A slow breeze stirred the wind chimes, and a mockingbird chattered nearby. Joanna sipped her tea and said, "One woman's rejection became another's legacy." Elaine didn't respond immediately. She just looked out at her garden. The lavender she'd planted the week after Caroline's dismissal was in full bloom. Some things, she thought, thrive in silence. The next morning, she walked to the mailbox, expecting nothing more than the usual flyers and catalogs. But halfway back up the driveway, her chest tightened. It wasn't sharp, but it stopped her mid-step. She leaned against the porch railing, breathing slow, controlled. She waited. When it didn't pass, she went inside, calmly retrieved her insurance card, and called urgent care. They asked if she needed an ambulance. She declined. "I can get there on my own," she said. "I just want to be sure." She left a note on the kitchen table. "Gone for a quick checkup. Nothing dramatic. Love, E." As she backed out of the driveway, she glanced at the house in her rearview mirror. Its windows glinted in the morning sun. A structure full of history, built on resilience. Every lock she'd installed, every document she'd sealed, every decision she'd made, it had led here. And now, even her body was asking her to double-check the details. The fluorescent lights in the urgent care lobby buzzed with a kind of impatient hum. But Elaine didn't flinch. She sat with her purse in her lap, her coat folded over one arm and her breathing calm. Her heartbeat had steadied in the car, but she'd come in anyway. Not out of fear, out of principle. "Elaine Foster," a nurse called gently. She stood slowly, her joints reminding her of their age. "Yes, that's me." In the exam room, they checked her vitals. Her oxygen was fine, blood pressure slightly high, but nothing alarming. The chest tightness had faded like a passing storm. Still, the nurse asked the question. "Is there anyone we should notify?" Elaine didn't hesitate. "My emergency contact is Joanna Briggs. Her number's on file." The nurse nodded and moved on. No one said the name Caroline. No one asked about children. And Elaine didn't offer it. After a short ECG and some basic labs, the doctor smiled and said, "You're good to go. Likely a stress response, but nothing dangerous. Just take it easy." Elaine offered a tight smile. "I've been taking it easier than anyone knows." She walked out without needing help. No calls, no drama. Just her breath in the chilly air and the quiet resolve of someone who had done her paperwork in advance. At home, she changed into her soft slippers and put the kettle on. While it warmed, she opened her laptop. A message from Isaac was waiting. Subject line, "Final phase." Confirmation. Inside was everything they had planned in their quiet hours across his oak desk. The digital obituary with a custom release schedule. The pre-written will notification that would go only to approved parties, and the locked memorial fund activation instructions. The email ended with a quiet note. "You've built the most precise afterlife plan I've ever seen." You didn't just close doors, Elaine. You replaced the locks. She read it twice, then archived it. Closure didn't need applause. The next morning, someone knocked gently at the door. She opened it to find Lily, cheeks pink from the cold, holding a bouquet of sunflowers and eucalyptus stems wrapped in brown paper. "I saw these and thought of you," Lily said. "Just because." Elaine's throat tightened unexpectedly. She reached for the bouquet, then for Lily's hand. "You have impeccable timing." They sat at the kitchen table, the flowers in a jar between them. Lily talked about school projects, poetry assignments, and how she might want to study something involving books, like you did. Elaine smiled. "There's magic in paper. Never forget that." When Lily left, Elaine placed the bouquet in the front window where it could catch the morning sun. She sat down at her desk, pulled out her final set of materials, and reached for a red envelope, thicker than the rest, sealed with a notary stamp. Inside were 3 documents, one for the registrar's office confirming her posthumous estate representative, one certifying burial preferences, and one final codicil, her handwritten instructions, notarized, stamped, and backed by Isaac's office. No amendments allowed, no additions possible, no entry points for those who once shut the door on her. She stood up slowly, envelope in hand, and walked to the mailbox. The autumn air carried a sharpness that whispered of winter approaching. Elaine breathed it in, steady and deliberate, and opened the brass lid. Her fingers hovered for a moment. Not from hesitation, but recognition. This was it. The last move, the final stroke, the final seal. She slid the envelope in and closed the lid. The sound was quiet but final, like the last page of a novel falling shut. Somewhere, someone would learn too late that they no longer had a place in a story they thought they could rewrite. But Elaine? She had already moved on to the acknowledgments. The sound of the wooden lid closing over the legacy box was quiet, but it echoed like a door being locked behind her. Elaine sat at her desk, palms resting flat on the oak surface, eyes focused on the simple walnut chest in front of her. The finish was smooth, polished by hand, every edge rounded and deliberate. It looked like a keepsake, not a weapon, but she knew better. Inside was everything that mattered, nothing more, nothing less. She lifted the lid one final time, checking every layer with the precision of someone used to alphabetizing for children who couldn't yet read. A stack of handwritten letters bound in soft blue ribbon. Recipes that smelled like her kitchen in winter, her husband's favorite stew, Lily's favorite lemon cake. A list of books she hoped Lily would read by 25. A pair of small photo albums. A pressed flower from her wedding bouquet, fragile but intact. And tucked beneath it all, a sealed envelope containing the deed transfer and the full details of the trust. Elaine had written Lily's name across the envelope in deep green ink, to be opened on your 30th birthday, when your hands are strong enough to carry what others tried to drop on you. There was no trace of Carolyn, not a letter, not a line, not even a note of explanation. Some absences are the most honest form of legacy. Elaine shut the box again and exhaled through her nose. No tears, no tremble. Just the kind of silence that comes when the work is done. She brought the box to the living room and set it gently in the cabinet next to the fireplace. Not hidden, but not flaunted either. Just waiting. That afternoon, Joanna arrived with a thermos of hot cider and a paper bag full of almond biscotti. "Big day?" she asked, kicking the leaves off her boots before stepping inside. Elaine nodded. "Final day." Joanna handed her the thermos. "So, is everything sealed up tight?" "Tighter than Caroline's excuses," Elaine replied, almost smiling. Joanna snorted. "I swear, Elaine, you didn't just close the door. You raised it off the hinges and nailed it to the ceiling." "I didn't want drama," Elaine said. "I wanted peace. And I finally figured out they're not the same thing." They took their drinks out to the porch. The late autumn sun slanted across the hills, golden and slow. Birds chirped somewhere near the pines, and the air smelled faintly of chimney smoke from a house down the street. Joanna took a sip and leaned back. "You gave her nothing?" "Not even a footnote," Elaine said. Eyes forward. "She never made space for me, so I made space for peace." They sat in companionable silence, watching the day unwind like thread. No voices raised, no calls unanswered. Just two women who had learned the sharpest lines could be drawn with the quietest hands. As the sun dipped below the ridge, Elaine's cell buzzed softly on the table between them. She picked it up, squinting at the screen. A name she had come to trust, Isaac Dyer. She answered without hesitation. "Elaine," his calm voice came through, low and certain. "It's all done. Deeds filed. Letters secured. Healthcare directives registered. Everything is certified and archived." She closed her eyes, letting it settle in her chest. He continued. "You've built a legacy that can't be misinterpreted. It's yours, every piece of it." A smile flickered at the corner of her mouth. "And Elaine," Isaac added, "the future is yours." She hung up, set the phone down, and poured the last of the cider into Joanna's cup. "Well then," she murmured, "let's drink to the future, where there's no room for ghosts." They toasted without clinking, just two cups lifted in solidarity as the light faded from the porch steps. The morning light filtered through the kitchen window like a soft breath. Warm, slow, unhurried. Elaine tied her scarf tightly around her neck, slipped a worn leather notebook into her coat pocket, and stepped onto the trail that wound behind her house. The leaves were starting to fall in earnest now, burnt orange, deep gold, and a few stubborn green ones clinging on. With every step, the ground gave a gentle crunch beneath her boots, each sound a punctuation mark on her quiet final chapter. She felt lighter than she had in years, lighter than she had the day she buried her husband, lighter than the afternoon Caroline shut the door with a smile so practiced it stung. The trail curved along the ridge, revealing a full sweep of the valley below. Asheville, peaceful in its morning hush. A small hawk circled overhead, wings slicing the air like declarations. Elaine tilted her chin toward the sky. "I filled it," she whispered, voice carried only by the wind. "The space she left, I filled it." Back home, the living room felt more like a sanctuary than a room. The safe stood quietly in the corner, sealed and tucked behind framed art and shelves of books. Elaine didn't touch it anymore. There was no need. Everything inside it, from the deed to the trust to the legacy letters, was final, filed, fireproof. The future had been carved, not granted, and it bore no fingerprints but her own. On the mantel above the fireplace, Lily's school photo smiled out from a simple silver frame. Her hair was tucked behind her ears, eyes wide with the kind of softness only found in people who hadn't yet learned to armor themselves. Beside it sat a small cream envelope marked, "To Lily, open on your 18th birthday." Elaine had read it once after sealing it. Not because she doubted the words, but because she wanted to feel the weight of them again. It wasn't about money or mistrust. It was about the right to write your own story. And the strength to hand it to someone who wouldn't fold it into excuses. She sat at the writing desk with her journal, the same one she'd kept through every twist in this long unraveling. Her pen moved slowly, ink spreading like roots through soil. I had space for her. She made none, so I made space for myself. She paused, then underlined it. The sound of footsteps across the porch pulled her back. One knock, then another. Not urgent, familiar. Elaine smiled before she even opened the door. Joanna stood there, cheeks red from the cold, a thermos in one hand, a paper bag in the other. "I brought coffee and those ridiculous orange cardamom scones you pretend not to like." Elaine stepped aside with a laugh. "I stopped pretending last winter." They settled on the porch, wrapped in knitted throws, the thermos steaming between them. The birds chirped as if gossiping, and the wind carried just enough chill to remind them time was still moving forward. But slower now. Joanna raised her cup. "To the legacy you didn't just leave, but lived." Elaine met the toast. To quiet victories, the kind no one claps for, but you feel in your bones. They drank without clinking, letting the moments settle like dust on old pages. Inside, on the hallway wall, hung a framed needlepoint from decades ago. It read, "Home is not a place. It's a person who makes room for you." For years, Elaine had believed that person had to be someone else. Now she knew, sometimes it had to be you. And as the sun began to stretch its arms across the porch, warming the hem of her coat, Elaine thought again of Carolyn's words, cruel only because they'd been said with such ease. "We don't have room for you." Elaine sipped her coffee and exhaled slowly, her voice a murmur lost to the mountain breeze. "So I made no room for her in my future."